deadly Florida school shootings. We're going outnumbered overtime now. I'm Harris Faulkner. Just minutes from now, about 100 students, survivors of the massacre, after attending a funeral for one of their classmates, will be boarding buses headed to the state capitol in Tallahassee. They'll be meeting with state officials ahead of a rally tomorrow demanding tougher gun legislation. Some Florida students also staging a walkout to protest gun violence in another area of Florida just moments ago. Let's go live now to Steve Harrigan, who's live in Coral Springs, Florida. Obviously, everybody's starting to get on those buses, and I understand that you have the opportunity to talk with one of those students.
Harris, this is the scene right here, the public shopping center parking lot. You can see around me a crowd of students and parents, a lot of them holding sleeping bags or pillows. We've got two buses here. These students, less than a week after this tragedy, are preparing to set off for Tallahassee. They're going to meet with state legislators and also have an anti-gun rally right after all these tumultuous events of the past week. With me is 17-year-old Charlotte, one of the students here. Charlotte, you've had a rough week. Now you're heading out to Tallahassee. Why are you going there?
I'm going there because we're trying to spark change. We've seen the same cycle happen over and over again the past few years. Of a tragedy happens, people fight for it, and then within 2 weeks it's gone. But as you can see, we're not backing down. We're going to go talk to legislators and try to reform at least some of the current bills. We're not allowed to introduce any of our own bills right now, but at least that's going to be a start for us to start talking about starting to change what weapons people can get their hands on, mental health reform, everything.
Charlotte, I know a lot of people are wondering, how are the students doing? You're very composed now, very articulate, but emotionally, how are you doing?
It's been really hard, honestly, but spending a lot of time with my friends, as a group, has been really helpful. But also putting most of our energy towards trying to change everything is helping a lot, because we know that there's going to be something positive that comes out of this tragedy.
So, Harris, they're trying to channel some of that grief, some of that anguish here into political action. They leave today. There have been a number of anti-gun rallies across the state, and the politicians, especially here in Florida, are starting to feel some of that pressure. Harris, back to you.
Steve, I don't know if Charlotte is still standing next to you. I'm kind of curious to know how much the students are aware and also pushing for changes at a very high federal level, too, with all that was missed that we know of now by the FBI. 39 visits by law enforcement to the suspect's home. Information gets passed to the FBI, and it seems like it dangles there, and they could have done some things preventively. What's being talked about among the students about that?
Charlotte, a lot of people have made suggestions that maybe different organizations might have dropped the ball on this case, that the FBI had a tip, the police visited several times, that a lot of people in school actually knew about this suspected shooter. Are you angry, or do you feel like maybe some people have let you down?
I'm not angry at the students at all. We did what we could. We reported him to the school. We reported him to the cops and everything. However, the FBI did kind of drop the ball on it. They got a tip for it. They knew that he was a danger, yet they forgot about it. They just set it aside because they didn't think it was important. But I'm not really that frustrated. I'm trying to be more positive about it and try to think about the future from it. But definitely in the future, they need to take our threats seriously, take our tips seriously, so we can prevent things like this from happening.
There's Charlotte, a junior in high school, 17 years old, right after a massive school shooting here, on her way to Tallahassee with about 100 of her classmates, trying to stay positive after a real tragedy here in Parkland. Harris?
You know, I know that those students have just come from a funeral as well, and they have more of that, I imagine, in their immediate future right now. We, of course, send our best to all of them, and Steve, getting her perspective on this was helpful for the conversation that they are anticipating to have with lawmakers. So please say thank you to Charlotte and any of the other students that you see.
Will do.
Steve Harrigan reporting live for us. Joining us now, a state lawmaker who just attended the funeral of Peter Wang, the one I was talking about, a 15-year-old junior ROTC cadet who was killed helping his classmates get to safety during the massacre. Jared Moskowitz is a Democratic Florida state representative who graduated from the high school where the shooting happened. And you're with us now, and I'm curious to know if you can tell us kind of what the mood is on the ground there. These young people seem so determined to get onto buses to have a conversation. What will they find on the other side, and can it be bipartisan?
Thank you. Yes, the students are determined. They're grieving. They're angry. It's the same mood I feel as someone from the area, someone who went to the high schools, and as a legislator. I think they will find, when they get to Tallahassee, that we have enough people on both sides of the aisle to do something when it comes to what happened at Marjory Stoneman Douglas. The idea of doing nothing is not acceptable. It's not acceptable to me. It's not acceptable to others potentially across the aisle. But if we give in to the usual special interests and we give in to the usual partisanship that takes place, not just in Washington, D.C., but in Tallahassee as well, it's possible we could leave with nothing. That's not acceptable to me. And let me be clear to all 120 other legislators that I serve with. There is a letter of resignation that you can write at any point in time if you don't want to be part of the process. It's a one-page, put your name on it, sign it, and get out of the way, because we must do something for these students.
Yeah. You know, you speak so strongly about that. We've had this happen in our not-too-distant history. Things like it. Las Vegas comes to mind with hundreds of people who were shot at. And many school shootings, too. So I hear the emotion and the passion in your voice, and actually from both sides of the aisle, there's no denying that we don't want to come here again, so what do we need to do? The question becomes, are you, as bipartisan, and I know you're working on bipartisan legislation, willing to look at the things that you can actually change that we have not talked about strongly as a nation, like mental health? The FBI dropped the ball. Is anybody going to say that? Is there something that's accountability-wise on your level?
Sure, I'll say it. The FBI dropped the ball, local law enforcement dropped the ball, the local school board dropped the ball, the DCF, the Department of Children and Families, dropped the ball. All levels of government failed these children, and we're continuing to fail them until we fix it. Let's be clear. After 9/11, we had different organizations of government that had different pieces of information. They weren't talking to each other, so we created the Department of Homeland Security. We don't need to create more government in the state of Florida, but we do need a mandate that when different areas of government have hits on a potential threat, that they're talking to each other. Each department had a different piece to the puzzle, but we couldn't put the puzzle together because nobody was talking to each other. That is such a basic failure on all of us. We are all part of that system failure.
You know, when law enforcement went to the home 39 times and they reported to the FBI, there were some things that were working in the chain. So I know you list everybody, but there were some things that were working, and yet it still didn't come together. The reason I ask this isn't just to be able to take the conversation away from guns, but what you're talking about would have mattered whether this guy walked in there with a knife. I mean, it just didn't get done.
Yeah, it's unacceptable. It did not get done. The intelligence that they had was not obviously looked at, was not given to the right people, was not looked at seriously, and it's unacceptable. I agree. Before the AR-15 ever wound up in his hands, government failed these students. But listen, there are 17 people dead because someone was at the age of 18 who should not have had a weapon in their hands and had over 150 bullets and extended magazines, was able just to walk onto a school, get into a building, and within 5 minutes mow down 17 people. And in fact, he would have killed dozens more if he was able to shoot through the hurricane glass from the 3rd floor, which is what he tried to do. And then the coward tried to walk away with the rest of the students, went to a local Walmart. Let me tell you something else. I know the state attorney and the defense is looking at whether or not he should serve life in prison or he should get the death penalty. Before any of those decisions are made, I think that they should consult the families. And if the state attorney is looking for someone to serve on the jury, I'm available.
Wow. I'm not sure where you're going with that. I know Senator Marco Rubio has called for the death penalty. I interviewed the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. She has said that it seems like things are in place to be able to call for that. I don't know where you're going with that, but it sounds like you're pretty emotional around the issue. I want to point this out because this is another one of those segments of the conversation that is so critical. We've seen recent polling that shows 77% of people surveyed said that mental health services failed in this and could have been better to prevent it. I'm curious to get your opinion on what's being done at a state, legal, and federal level to address that as well.
Well, I can't address what's happening at the federal level. What I can address is what we're looking at. We have 3 weeks to get something done. After 3 weeks, we don't meet again until December of 18.
You wouldn't make an exception after all these kids died? I mean, I hear the passion around you, and whenever I see Congress on the Hill or even at the state level, the state legislators, I always scratch my head because till the job is done, why would you go home?
That's right. I can't agree with you more. In fact, after the Pulse shooting, I was the one who led the effort to try to get us into special session. But unfortunately, there were enough friends from across the aisle that decided that they didn't want to go back into session in Tallahassee to address what happened in Pulse. And so I'm not saying I wouldn't stay. I'll stay as long as it takes. But the fact that we have 3 weeks, the fact that the clock is ticking, puts some pressure on us to get something done rather than sit up there and twiddle our fingers and do nothing. It's just, we must get this done. Failure is not an option.
We get it. Jared Moskowitz, I want to ask this before you go because we touched on it. Would you, in fact, go for the death penalty in this case?
Oh, without a doubt. I don't even think there's a question that we shouldn't consider the death penalty. I know that's a touchy issue. Some people don't believe in it, but let me tell you something.
Particularly in your Democratic Party.
Yeah, let me be clear. This wasn't a random killing at a gas station. This gentleman methodically planned and mowed down 17 innocent people. He destroyed the lives of their family members, families that now had to figure out what to bury their child in, to put them in the ground, to come back to their house to an empty room, for teachers to come back to the classroom with empty chairs. Let me tell you something. There's a reason the death penalty exists. It exists for this person. That is without question in my mind. But truthfully, that's up to the families.
Mm-hmm. And you said you'd be willing to testify if you could. Good to see you, Jared Moskowitz in Florida State Legislature there. Thank you very much. I don't know if you could see off to the left, we had a picture of a young woman with a bullhorn. They are getting those students loaded onto buses now in Florida, going to Tallahassee today. She's apparently reading a statement. We can hear her talking. And I want to listen here. Not a statement. She's reading which buses the kids should go on, so I want to correct myself there. We will be heading next month to Washington, D.C., where a national gun debate is underway. The White House now saying President Trump is open to efforts at improving the gun background check system. But even a bill on that now in the Senate is facing an uphill battle. We'll talk about it. Earlier, a Republican congressman from Florida said he supports new gun legislation like universal background checks and raising the minimum age for purchasing a rifle. And he believes that the president could get behind those measures as well. Watch.
I think it is his instinct to support some of these ideas, and today I invite him to do so because our country is demanding this, because there are a lot of young people in the state of Florida and throughout the country that are stepping up and speaking out, and they want to see action.
Bob Cusack is editor-in-chief of The Hill, and as we cover this breaking news now with these students getting onto the bus and trying to insert their conversations, Bob, always good to have you along. I don't know if you heard the Democrat calling for the death penalty for the shooter in this. And from my reporting, that would be kind of an exception in some news making with him joining others across the aisle.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it just shows the passion, the anger, the angst that is happening in Florida and across the country. And the politics have shifted. There's no doubt about that. And, these kids in Florida, these walkouts, these rallies going to Tallahassee, they're coming to Washington, and they're going to be pushing this. Congress is out this week, but this issue is going to be certainly on the front burner when they get back next week. Mr. Moskowitz, who's with the state legislature there of Florida, was just telling me, okay, so they've got this bipartisan legislation moving through. Others on the Hill have bipartisan. Where do you think they can agree, and how do we protect the Second Amendment while they do that? Well, there is a bill in the Senate, and it's supported by conservatives as well as Democrats. Lead sponsor is the #2 Senate Republican, John Cornyn. And I think that bill has a decent shot to get at least out of the Senate. Now, that bill has previously passed the House, but it was coupled with a reciprocity bill that you could take guns across state lines. So now, would that bill satisfy gun control advocates? No, absolutely not. Is it a step in the right direction? Most people think so, and it's something that it would strengthen already existing gun laws, and that's why the NRA is actually behind it. So the president is the key player. How much is he going to be pushing for that bill and other like-minded bills?
Yeah, I just go back to one of the first tweets after this from the president when he called out 2 words that we can't get away from: mental health. Mm-hmm. Mental health. That being part of the conversation, and then now what we know were the bells and whistles that apparently didn't chime or ring at the right times, and these kids fell into a category of missed red flags, and they became the victims of authorities that didn't connect the dots. As you look at all of that, is there anything in this bipartisan legislation that talks about that? Because, I mean, we can go in circles about guns all day long. But if we're talking about things that got missed weeks and months ago, that doesn't have anything to do with guns. And it's hard as a parent, as a journalist, as just a human being here in America to look at this conversation and go on and not see those pieces lifted up and said, yeah, these are important. Let's deal with them.
Well, it's similar to, I know you're talking to the legislator about communication on 9/11, and this bill would increase communication among different agencies which have not reported what is going on with certain individuals to the FBI. So in that sense, it would improve communication, and without a doubt, I mean, the FBI dropped the ball. It's inexcusable how they didn't act on that, and there should be wide-ranging investigations so that will never happen again. But you're right. I think mental health has got to be part of the situation where both sides, Republicans and Democrats, have to sit down and say, how can we have this never happen again, or at least put in place situations and laws that would at least prevent it from the chances of it happening again.
Well, the young people that we see on the left side of our screen were the survivors, and they are the people who are taking their message now to their state capital, Tallahassee, in Florida, as they get on buses. This is breaking news this hour. Coral Springs, Florida. Bob Cusack, thank you very much.
Thank you.
President Trump has endorsed former foe Mitt Romney in the Utah Senate race. Whether the move signals the two have overcome their differences and can work together in Washington. Our power panel reacts shortly from now. Plus, Robert Mueller filing another charge in the Russia investigation, what this means for the investigation going forward, and what the White House is saying about it. Former Justice Department official Robert Driscoll will weigh in. Stay close.
This indictment, just like the one on Friday, only reinforces our overarching point when it comes to the special counsel's investigation, which is that, as the president has long stated, there's no evidence of collusion because none existed.
Fox News alert now, another new development in the Russia probe. Now special counsel Robert Mueller has charged a prominent New York attorney with lying to investigators about his last communication with a former campaign aide, Rick Gates, who was indicted, as you know, back in October. That attorney is expected to plead guilty today, this afternoon, in just a little while, we're told. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live for us in Washington with the details. Catherine?
Well, thanks. Here as the federal court hearing begins just over an hour from now, and a Fox News crew got footage of the lawyer who is expected in court just as he arrived at the FBI's Washington field office a few blocks from here. According to court records made public this morning, Alex van der Zwaan lied to federal agents on November 3rd, 2017 about his contact with the target of the special counsel Russia investigation and their conversations about a year earlier, 2 months before the presidential election. Guilty plea is expected in the case, and it's standard to finalize outstanding issues at the FBI field office before court. Court records allege the lawyer lied about his last contact with Rick Gates, who was indicted last fall along with former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. The 31-page, 12-count indictment focused on their years as lobbyists and political consultants working with Ukraine. Gates and the lawyer, who will be in court later today, worked on a report for the trial of a Ukrainian politician, Yulia Tymoshenko, first woman to be prime minister in that country. After leaving office, Tymoshenko was prosecuted for fraud and other crimes, which her supporters said were politically motivated because she wanted Ukraine to be closer to Europe and NATO and not Russia. Legal observers question whether a guilty plea today will increase pressure on Gates to cut a deal and flip against Manafort. This 2 pages filed with the court earlier today are pretty thin on detail, but they read in part, Alex van der Zwaan did willfully and knowingly make materially false, fictitious, and fraudulent statements and representations. And of course, we'll know more about an hour from now, and we'll bring that to you, Harris.
All right, Catherine, thank you very much.
You're
Joining
welcome.
me now for perspective on all of this is Robert Mueller's latest charge in the Russia investigation, former Justice Department official Robert Driscoll. Okay, so break this down for us and tell us the significance of this.
Well, I mean, this is one of Rick Gates' lawyers and presumably one of Manafort's lawyers who's pleading guilty to a false statement to Robert Mueller. And if you read the information that he pled to, which is pretty thin, it indicates that he had conversations that he denied having to the special counsel, and he didn't turn over emails that he had to the special counsel when he was interviewed in September. And in fact, it looks like he recorded one of the conversations he had which I guess would be, pretty good evidence that he actually was aware that conversation happened because he had a recording of it and had never turned it over. So I think that it's, well, on the other hand, it's another one of these process type of, guilty pleas. It doesn't have anything to do with collusion or anything like that.
Right.
It's a false statement. I think it could be used to put pressure on Manafort and Gates, and that whatever story their attorney was telling, at least timeline-wise, turned out not to be the true story.
Do you, and we're all looking at the same facts, but you're the expert in all of this, former member of the DOJ.
Yep.
As you look at this, is there a trend with pretty thin? I hear you describe it that way, and now we have a judge who wants to take a look at all the evidence against General Mike Flynn, because it could be thin. We don't know. He wants to look at it. So I'm just asking, how does it even get this far if it's pretty thin?
Well, what I meant, it's thin factually. I think this is a strong case.
That's what I mean.
And that it's clearly a false statement. There's not a lot of detail. The question is why. Usually not turning over an email would not get you a federal plea agreement, but we don't know the context of it, and if it, the timing of it was during the campaign, if it was denial of something like that. But I think probably the special counsel is trying to get this lawyer wrapped up before he, further negotiates with Rick Gates and Manafort.
Is there anything about Rick Gates? Paul Manafort might be a different type of a beast because you had so much that happened before the campaign. But with Rick Gates, there's been reporting of financial concerns. They put a lot of pressure on him.
Right.
Do they need to pressure the attorney to get to Rick Gates?
Again, we don't know. The one thing about the special counsel's investigation I've noticed is that no one's been able to predict anything. The Russia indictments came as kind of a surprise. This indictment came as a surprise. Even the timing.
Does that tell you anything, or that's how it works?
Just that they're not leaking.
Okay, that's what I just wrote down. No leaks.
which is good, and that's the way it should happen. But it's hard to know. You could speculate that. Because of the timing of the communications at issue here, they were asking about communications that happened during the campaign. And clearly, Manafort and Gates had the pre-existing relationship with Ukrainian and Russian interests. And the question is whether that was used to influence the campaign.
Last quick question on this topic. Yep. Any of it point to collusion? Anything moving the ball going down there? Or are we just going lateral movement now?
Nothing in this indictment. Not the last couple of indictments have not had anything to do with collusion. They've had to do with more collateral issues, and we still don't have the answer to the big question.
Wow. Former member of the DOJ says we don't have the answer to the big question.
We do not.
All right, let's move on. As well, allies reportedly are urging the president to pardon some of those in the Russia investigation. Some conservatives voicing their opinions on this pretty strongly, Robert, because they feel like, well, look, if General Flynn is an example, what do you think about that?
I think from the president's perspective, it doesn't make sense to pardon anybody right now. I think that so far there is no collusion that's been proven. And so pardoning people for these kind of collateral crimes would, I think, further a narrative that he's just doing them a favor because they're his friends. I just don't think pardoning this early, particularly for Gates and Manafort, makes any sense for him.
Here's the president on the subject.
Did you consider a pardon for Michael Flynn? I don't want to talk about pardons for Michael Flynn yet. We'll see what happens. Let's see. I can say this. When you look at what's gone on with the FBI and with the Justice Department, people are very, very angry.
I want to make it clear that was back in December, and now we fast forward, and we do hear this call for, we'll look at some of these people and whether or not you'd pardon them, because not only has it gone far afield, that's not the point, but it's the level of what they are being indicted for or accused of or copping pleas to and that sort of thing.
I think that the president can better make that assessment kind of at the end of this whole investigation, because the problem is a lot of particularly Flynn, got a very lenient plea as compared to Manafort, who got indicted. And that's presumably based on cooperation. And so what the president can assess is what Flynn has either confessed to or talked to the special counsel to behind closed doors. And so the president doesn't want to get in a situation where he's pardoning somebody but doesn't know the full story yet himself.
Right. And from the DOJ's perspective, which you come at this from, the White House now should do what?
I think the White House is basically doing the right thing, notwithstanding the president's Twitter rants once in a while, and that they're cooperating with the investigation. Ty Cobb is, I think, the kind of calm voice of reason, just saying, cooperate, there's nothing here, and that'll be proven eventually. And I know it's difficult for, I mean, the president really is no different than many clients you have in these situations, with their level of frustration that even if they feel they might be vindicated at the end, the level of frustration of going through the process is very, very high, and they want to expedite that as quickly as possible, even though sometimes you can't.
You know, it's so interesting for you to bring it back to the human element, because I think that gets lost in all of this because it's the president of the United States. But you can understand then what you're saying, his frustration and him voicing
Right, I mean,
that.
lawyers, we're very comfortable saying, well, he hasn't been charged with anything, so it's okay. But I think for the average person on the street, you say to yourself, there's a federal investigation, the FBI is involved. There's this kind of patina of guilt that comes over you, that, you know, people treat you differently, and they're kind of reluctant to be with you. Now, obviously, the president's a different, you know, he's got a different platform than most of us for that. But even the average everyday client that gets caught up in a federal investigation, it's extremely frustrating. The kind of emotional part of it is half the battle, frankly, when you represent someone in that position, because their level of frustration can get so high, and you don't want them to act out and do something out of frustration.
Robert Driscoll, thank you for your experience, your expertise coming in today. We appreciate it. The White House is announcing President Trump will attend his first press dinner since taking office. That despite his ongoing battle with the mainstream media, some of them, whether this is an olive branch or something else. Stay close. Hey, the White House is saying President Trump will join D.C.'s media elite to attend next month's annual Gridiron Club dinner. It will be his first appearance at a press dinner since taking office, but the White House says no decision has yet been made on whether he will attend the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is in April. He skipped it last year. He held a rally instead, you may remember. I'm joined now by Fox News media analyst Howie Kurtz, host of Media Buzz and the author of Media Madness, Donald Trump, the Press, and the War Over the Truth. Great to see you as always, Howie.
Hi.
So I would think, and I'm wondering if there is any sort of controversy, I would think that the press would be excited to attend this dinner and for the President of the United States to be there.
Yeah, and you know, I think it is a bit of a peace feeler from a president who's perhaps growing a bit more accustomed to the largely negative coverage he gets 24/7. I mean, a year ago, he was stunned and kind of angry at the coverage he was getting as a new president. He didn't just blow off the dinner. He didn't just give the speech in Pennsylvania as a bit of counter-programming. He said at that speech, Harris, that the Washington media is part of the problem, and he attacked MSNBC and CNN by name. And there's a scene in my book where I describe how he asked Kellyanne Conway after the speech, well, did CNN carry live the part where I denounced CNN? And the answer was yes.
You know, statistically speaking, he's not wrong about that negativity. You and I have talked about it on this very program. Also, just looking at the facts, you know, there have been times when there have been not even just a misstep, an outright mistake or something else, I would call it a mistake, by some members of the mainstream media that they've had to go on record to fix. So this is an opportunity to be in the same room with a man who's willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. The question is, will the mainstream media give him the benefit of the doubt?
I don't see the coverage changing any kind soon. I think both sides are kind of invested in it. For the press, it's the anti-Trump narrative. For the president, the press is a big fat target of convenient foil when things aren't going so well. But as far as his, let's just say he goes ahead and does the Correspondents' Dinner, which I know people out there are wondering what's the big deal. Well, it's kind of the celebrity-studded spring prom for the Beltway media. This is a guy who sat there in 2011 and had to take it when Barack Obama kind of ridiculed him over the birther conspiracy. I think there's part of Donald Trump that'd like to be up there, tell some killer jokes, stick it to the press, show that he can do it, take the jokes from the comedian. In other words, go onto their turf. And by the way, if he does that after blowing it off last year, there'd be a big dramatic buildup and the ratings would be huge.
Yeah, you know, you and I were both at that Correspondents' Dinner, and then just citizen Donald J. Trump sat there. We saw smiles on his face at some point, and then looking kind of serious. I mean, they skewered him pretty bad from the lectern. Possibly nobody got it worse than Martin O'Malley, because President Obama at the time said that nobody would know him in the room. You know, I'm just riffing. Yeah. So we get back to this point, though, with the President of the United States. And it's more than just him showing up to this dinner, because this means face-to-face, mano a mano, we get to see the process at work. And he hasn't said anything that's not free speech protected. I don't understand what the media are all up in arms with half the time anyway. Is it just an obsession?
Well, journalists tend to be rather thin-skinned. We love to dish it out. We have more trouble taking it. And this is a president who is constantly on the attack against what he calls fake news. Sometimes I think he punches down against individual cable news hosts in a way that's not necessarily in his interest. But the truth is, Harris, there's a bit of a love-hate relationship here. Mostly hate lately. But the president actually wants to be liked by journalists. He enjoys talking to reporters. He gives a lot of access, despite the constant attacks. And so I think he'd like nothing better than to go into the lion's den and kind of own the moment. Or he may just decide he has better things to do than to hobnob with a bunch of journalists and listen to a comedian taking him on.
You know, I just look at the pure access that this president gives. Almost every time he boards something where he's getting ready to fly off, he stops. And I made the comment last hour on Outnumbered that you better build in some free time for yourself during your lunch hour, because he's probably going to say something. That kind of access, I would think, would be, I don't want to use the word rewarded, but at least respected as, well, okay, well, then let's push in with the things that really matter when we ask President questions. Your last word.
President Trump continues to give interviews to what he calls the failing New York Times, despite the criticism. He meets privately off the record with some anchors like NBC's Chuck Todd. He is learning how to do this. I don't think his opinion of the media have gone up at all, but I think his tactics might be changing. I'm not saying it's going to be some great ceasefire, but if he comes to the dinner, maybe he'll get 24 hours of good coverage.
Howard Kurtz, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thanks, Harris.
The president giving Mitt Romney a huge boost in his run for the Senate, despite the two sharing some choice words in the past. What has these two singing a different tune?
Here's what I know. Donald Trump is a phony, a fraud. His promises are as worthless as a degree from Trump University.
The guy's a stone-cold loser. He choked, and when you're a choker, you can never give a choker.